Hello, welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Allenwyma. Today I'm with Terry Liang, who is a software developer based out of San Francisco, California, who is the creator of the state management solution called Creator. Welcome, Terry. How are you?
Hi, thank you, Alan. Thanks for inviting me here. Hello, everyone. So my name is Terry Liang. I'm glad to be here to talk about Creator. Maybe let me introduce myself a little bit.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Cool. I currently live in San Francisco area in United States. Currently, I'm working on my own startup. It's called Chooly. It's a personal finance app for the middle class, helping them to manage their assets and investment performance. It's building with Flutter, so you can talk about that if you want. Before doing the startup, I'm mostly doing backend stuff. I'm a backend engineer in Lyft for a few years. If you haven't heard about Lyft, it's a ride-sharing company, mostly for North America. Before that, I worked for Google for a few years. That's pretty much about myself.
Were you doing Flutter at Google or were you doing something else?
No, not Flutter. I work for YouTube. That's building YouTube's backend infrastructure. At the time I was in Google, I think Flutter is not even a popular thing. At that time in Google, mostly doing Python and C++.
Now, how do you compare Dart with Python C++ then? Which one do you enjoy more?
It's a hard question. I don't think they are actually comparable. Because Python, C++, my experience mostly on the backend, trying to build up the APIs, the storage, those kind of things. Dart, I think the major use case is Flutter, right? It's mostly for the front end. It's a UI toolkit. So there's not a lot of things to compare, but I do enjoy using Dart. I think the language designed pretty well, very clean and very easy to understand.
I think Google AdSense backend is all built in Dart, though, if I remember correctly. I know they say they built everything up in Google AdSense with Dart.
Really, I don't think so, but I'm not so sure.
I mean, you could write backend in Dart now. I see people doing it more and more now these days.
I see, but probably not in Google address, even though I have been not been there for a while.
Okay. But you left Google to work over at Lyft. Why is that? Did you want to just try something different?
Yeah, mostly try something different. I want to work for some smaller companies. I joined Lyft before its IPO, so it's a fun experience to see how the company grows. Because my kind of hope is eventually doing my own stuff, so I'm trying to learn how to work on the middle-sized companies and eventually go into the small companies. Yeah.
Now, did you actually learn anything from how to make a startup from Lyft or no?
I think so. First of all, I learned a bunch of technologies outside Google because Google is a very large ecosystem itself. All the internal tools is different from the industry standard. So, for example, Google use AWS, use storage like a Bigtable Spanner. Those things are not open source. So in Lyft, I did learn a bunch of technologies outside of Google. Also, I learned a lot of things about how to build a product, how to engage with user, how to understand users' like behavior, how to try to doing experiments, those kind of things. Very interesting.
Now, at Lyft, is that where you started to pick up Flutter too, or no?
Not exactly. Flutter is all kind of my personal interest. So I have been using Flutter for a while, like a few years, but mostly for some smaller personal projects. For example, I built a messaging app between me and my wife. It's basically a kind of couple app with some messaging feature and several features like to share the to-do or track the anniversaries, those kind of things. Those are kind of personal projects, but the Chooly is the kind of major big thing I built with Flutter by myself. Yeah.
Now, what made you decide to leave Lyft to start working on Chooly?
Mostly because I see that problem and I'm very interested. The problem I'm trying to solve is I want to track my financing a little bit better way. I used to do that in a spreadsheet. So I have to pull in all my banks and all my brokerage accounts, put them into a spreadsheet, trying to understand how my spending looks like, how my performance looks like especially if I have a house, does that house perform better than the stock market? Those are kind of things I feel there should be a tool which can help people to answer those questions. And I see there's a gap. I see, for example, there's a bunch of budgeting tools which for like lower income people, and there's a bunch personal bankers which is working for the very high income people. But for the middle class, there's not a tool which can solve their problems. Their problems are kind of not very unique. They have some certain common attributes. For example, people want to know, do I spend too much on my grocery last year? People want to know, should I refinance for my house? Should I spend more money on the real estate versus stock market? Those questions can be answered somehow using technology with some simulations or scenario analysis. Those kind. So that's my interest and start doing things myself. Yeah.
Now, are you self-funding, or did you get some kind of capital from outside investors?
Currently, I'm still self-funding. Launched the app a few months ago. Have some user, but the user growth is not as good as I thought. It's tricky. Yeah.
Well, okay. So, how many people are actually in the company right now? Is it just yourself, or is there some others?
The full-time employee is just myself, but I have a bunch of friends helping and contractors as well.
Okay. So what are the other people who are helping you with? What are they doing? Are they doing the back end, or are they helping out with Flutter?
One people is helping with backend, and I have people helping on the marketing and user acquisition side.
Okay. Now for the back end, I'm guessing you're not using Dart then. What are you're using Python or something like that?
My backend is actually not complex. It's mostly Firebase. So you're familiar with Firebase, right? So basically, it's client talks to Firebase directly, getting a bunch of data. So there are a bunch of logic on the client side. On the server side, it's mostly Node.js using the Firebase functions, or you can call Google Cloud Functions. So it's a serverless architecture, a bunch of functions which serve as a backend.
How do you actually test those? Because I haven't found a good way to test Cloud Functions.
So the way to test it is first of all, you can try it locally. You can run the Firebase simulator locally if you want to do the end-to-end test. But mostly, if you want to write unit tests, the way to do it is trying to split the logic into some logic layer in the Node.js, trying to test those logic, but not testing the function surface. If that makes sense to you. That's how we do things right now.
Yeah, because I'm mostly used to writing like unit tests and things like that with like an automated test suite, but I don't think there's some kind of way to do that with Cloud Functions.
Not the Cloud Functions, but you can do things for normal Node.js stuff, right? I'm using TypeScript. It's basically Node.js TypeScript libraries. You can test those things.
Okay, so are you're using a Node.js backend? You're not using Cloud Functions?
It is in Cloud Functions, but Cloud Function is just API layer, right? It can call into the libraries you write, which is a bunch of TypeScript written libraries doing some logic layers. So as my API layer is pretty thin, which means you don't need to test too much on the Cloud Function layer, but testing the real business logic under the hood.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying now. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so yeah, that's always the tricky part. But like you said, keep it thin, it shouldn't be too bad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did you ever use Firebase before while you're at Google, or this is like all new to you?
This is all new to me.
Now, why'd you go Firebase route? Did you feel comfortable with Firebase, or you just wanted something that was kind of integrated with Flutter already?
I think I like Firebase. The storage model is pretty nice. I can have some relationship and I'm doing some queries there. I think I like that part. Another benefit is if you don't manage your own backend, you don't need to run your server. That's a plus. So you don't need to on-call, right? So for yourself. So.
Yeah, but now the negative is, don't forget, whenever you don't manage something, that means you're at the mercy of the people who do manage it. So
that's true.
Yeah, you don't miss the management. That just means somebody else has to take care of it. But I think Firebase is quite smooth, right?
Yeah, that's true. But I think for my team, it's small, right? So I would rather ask Doodle's people who probably have dozens of people to manage it rather than myself.
Have you ever had to reach out to support to Firebase before or no?
No, I don't have that need yet.
I had to deal with support from Google before, and I wasn't very happy. They launched Google Cloud GCP in Hong Kong, and I tried to launch a Kubernetes instance, and their reply was, "Yes, we know it's broken." And I said, "Okay, do you know what's going to be fixed?" "We don't know." "Okay, so what can I do?" And they said, "Oh, just keep trying, and if it works, then we fixed it. If it didn't work, then we're still working on it."
Oh my god! I think Doodle's support is not good. I agree.
That's why I get a little bit worried about this kind of stuff. Okay, so can we kind of roll back to, like, I'm kind of curious about, I mean, you worked at Lyft, right? I think Lyft is doing everything native, right?
Yes.
Well, first of all, wait, you're working at backend at Lyft, right? So you didn't do anything with mobile apps.
Not mobile, yeah. But I do have a little bit mobile experience. A few years ago, I did some iOS development and Android development as a personal projects as well. So I know the mobile stuff, yeah.
Okay, so you did it already, so then you're like, well, let's not do that again, or were you just saying I don't have time, or what was the thought process that you looked at Flutter?
I think that's both reasons. First of all, I don't have time. I don't have resource to do two native apps. That's probably the major reason people use Flutter in most cases, I guess. But another reason is I do like Flutter's language. I think it's very clean UI toolkit. So you write everything in code rather than for example, in the old time, you are doing Android, you will write a bunch of code, a bunch of XML, and trying to link them together. That's a very painful experience from my side. I think it's having everything clearly defined in the Dart language is the good thing to do. So as a developer, I can track everything precisely. I know what's going on my UI. It's a very nice thing.
Now, how did you feel? Like, I mean, if you've already done Android and iOS, I think doing Flutter is really quite different because you have this whole entire idea of composition, which I think is not, at least there was no Jetpack Compose when I started learning. There was no Swift UI, I think, yet. So it was all totally new to me. It's very different, I think, right? Like, did you feel very weird?
I think there is a little bit of learning curve. You need to understand the declarative language. But then I don't feel super weird, to be honest. I think it's pretty natural to me. Especially if you go a little bit deeper to understand how they build things internally. There's a widget tree, there's an element tree, there's a rendering object tree. So if you understand the relationship and how Flutter internally trying to use widget tree to build those element tree, then it should be really natural, I guess.
Yeah, but I don't know if everybody actually digs into that. Like, I dug in a little bit, but not too much. I'm aware of the trees, but I didn't dig in too much because
Me neither, but high level idea is simple, right? You declare something, they trying to map those things to a tree and trying to render the tree in the app, right? So
yeah, but I think the biggest thing that's definitely a mind shift for me is like, okay, wait, this build function will be called so many times. It just doesn't really make sense to me how that could be fast. But at the same time, once you understand the different trees, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, yeah, they're called fast, but actually that they're not actually doing anything, and so there's a difference between the element tree and the render tree and everything else.
yeah, I think you just said the point, right? That's the point which you should understand. Yeah.
Exactly. But when you started doing Flutter, right? I did look at Creator. There's a little bit of a history about how you guys started your app, right? Did you start off using Block right away, or did you play with Provider first, or how did you get started with your state management?
I kind of use Block right away, even though I tried the provider at that time. I think Block is quite popular. I think that's probably 2 or 3 years ago. Block is quite popular at that time as well. So I think for beginners, it's trying to be beginner friendly because it's not only a statement library, it's also trying to promote some design pattern, or maybe you can call it project structuring pattern, which is put something in the repository layer, put something in the logic layer. Those kind of things is good for beginners, so people can pick things up quickly. I do think Block is a very nice library. I still think it's going to it's still a very good library for a lot of use cases. The reason I kind of start looking for something else is when I'm using Blot, because my app has a bunch of client-side logic, I actually want to build some dependency between the states. Let's say, for example, you have a to-do app, you have a state of all to-do list, you have a filter, you want to have a derived state called a filter to-do, right? The way in Blot, you're probably going to handle them together. And actually, if you want to have two Blot or two bit which can depend on each other, you have to set up a bunch of stream listening and canceling, because under the hood, Blot is using streams. So that's going to be a lot of work if you want to build a lot of derived state, or you want to do relationship between states. That's why I started looking to find some other solutions. I see Riverpod. Riverpod is actually a very reactive solution, which you can easily create a derived state using Riverpod. That's why I switched to Riverpod. But as I said in the creator README, I think I do find several issues I don't like about Riverpod. And then I started trying to make change to it, trying to look into its code base. Then I found its code base is pretty complex. It's much complexer than I would expect. So I spent 2 days trying to figure out things, how to make larger changes in Riverpod. But I eventually gave up, thinking, okay, maybe I should just start from the scratch, trying to do something on my own, very similar to Riverpod, but start from the beginning. Then I spent 2 days to develop the first version of Creator. I think it's very small and nice and clean. So I start using it in my app and slowly test it. It ends out pretty nice, I think.
Can we roll back a little bit to Riverpod, right? You specifically said that you didn't like the async part of Riverpod, right? I think that's what I read. Yeah. So what I want to talk about is that so many people use Riverpod. I haven't heard many complaints about it, so I'm very interested to hear more about this. Maybe other people could be running into the same issues as you.
Cool. I think I also talked to Riverpod author Remy. I think he knows all these things, and I think it's probably having a fix are already fixed. But the two issues I saw, first one is streaming. If you're using a streaming provider, the behavior is a little bit not as I would expect. For example, if you have a streaming of loading data 1, data 2, data 3, the Riverpod streaming provider will give you loading data 1, loading data 2, loading data 3. That's a bit weird to me. I think I have a stream, I already have the data. Why should I force to see a loading state in between those data? Right? I think that's the way how Riverpod works, because they map each element into a future, and the future, when you see a new future, you have to be forced in a loading state, then resolve to a value state, right? So the way I design Creator is a little bit different, so I don't have to force to see those loading state. To be honest, that's not a big deal, but just a little bit weird to me. The second issue I saw about Riverpod is if you're using async in a future or streaming provider, you might lose state sometimes. But I believe that's probably already fixed. The reason is like this. So, Riverpod is having, should we assume everyone is familiar with Riverpod? But basically, it has a create function, which is going to create a state. This create function runs several times, especially if any of the dependency changes. Say, let's say one dependency changes, I'm running this create function. And the way Riverpod does is, before running the create function, let's delete all the dependencies, run the create function, trying to find out the dependencies inside those established inside the create function, then use those dependencies after the creation. Does that make sense? So if you are doing some asynchronous stuff and await for some long pending task inside the function, the dependency is already deleted but not yet established. So you might lose state for some edge cases. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
The way Riverpod solves this is by defining a global concept called a delayed deletion. Basically, they are trying to hold the old dependencies maybe for 5 seconds before deleting them. Hopefully, you finish your creation in 5 seconds, so you don't need to you have a new dependency within 5 seconds, so you don't need to lose your state. I think that's a solution, but in Creator, I think I solved that in a slightly better way. Basically, everything is happening. Basically, I logs all the dependencies in some place before I try to delete them. So everything is very nicely working correctly without using any waiting functions there. Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to go a little bit deeper into Creator, right? I took a little bit of a look at Creator, and I think you have kind of a functional way of doing it, right?
Kind of, but I would call it more reactive way. Maybe let's step back a little bit. I want to actually not focus on Creator today because that might be a little bit too boring. We can talk about the state management in general. We can talk about all the popular state management libraries. So in my mind, they can be categorized into how they propagate state. So I believe that's the most important factor, because if that defines the compatibility and limitation of a library. If two libraries sharing the same way to propagate the state, they probably looks a little bit similar. I think there are 4 ways to propagate the state: using widget, using stream, using subscription, and the final one is using graph. So using widget is simple because it's natively in Flutter. If you have used inherited widget, it's basically a way to use widget to propagate state. So inherit widget is, I can share some graph if that helps as well.
Yep. So just make sure you explain the graph as vividly as you can so everybody can understand at home.
Sounds good. So you can see this, right? This is the article I'm writing right now. But this is the graph for inherit widget. Inherit widget is just a widget. It holds some state and exposes state to its subtree. So their subtree can just using some function to get into this inherit widget and get into state. So you have a nice way to hold the state in a tree and access the state from your descendants. And the provider is another example of using widget tree to propagate state. It's just a syntax sugar around the inherit widget. It still holds a state in a subtree root, and its descendants can have access to those states easily. This is a nice way to do things in Flutter itself, but a lot of people want to develop their business logic in an isolated place without linking into Flutter widgets, right? So people start developing a bunch of other technologies. Using stream is definitely the easiest one, because streams can have states naturally, and the state can be listened to. So I think there are 2 libraries using stream to propagate state, which is Flutter block and Flutter redux. Without going into details, the concept is quite simple. If you define a stream somewhere, for example, in a global variable, and you can define some functions to put data into the stream, then you have a stream builder inside your Flutter widget. You pretty much have every building blocks here. So I have an example here, but for those people who don't see it, it's fine. The way Flutter block and Flutter redux works is just wrapping this into a nicer API. So if you define a stream in a global variable, which means the stream is always there, It's not good because you probably initialize the stream too early and not dispose the stream properly. So they basically wrap the stream inside the class and then using some provider to provide those class to a subtree root, then everything works. Okay, this is a graph for this. Basically, the state is still held in the subtree root, but now it's inside the specialized class, which could call qubit, could call block, or could call star in Redux. Inside the object, there's a string. So everything just what's this. So the people who want to get to the state just using the stream implicitly under the hood. Should I pause a little bit? Does that make sense, Alan?
Yeah,
so far?
Yeah, it definitely does.
Cool. I think the next group of things are using subscriptions. There are a few examples here, which is Riverpod, MobX, and also some part of the getX library. The idea is very different. They are not using streams at all. They are basically rolling out their own subscription model, meaning that they have a bunch of nodes. These nodes can subscribe to other nodes, so they basically form a graph somehow. For example, we can have a node 1, which generates integer. We have a node 2, which generates another integer. We have a node 3, which calculates the sum of those two nodes. We got a third integer. Then we can have a fourth node, which generates a widget using the output of the third node. So we implicitly form a graph here. So the way it works internally is basically each node trying to manage their subscriptions. For example, this node 3 will have internally will say, hey, I'm subscribing to node 1, node 2, and node 1 maybe have a out pointer edge to node 3, and node 2 also have a point edge to node 3. So if the state of node 1 and node 2 changes, we know that node 3 need to rebuild. So this is very nice because the concept is simple. You can have derived state just using this graph. The nice thing is you can even have a state which just populating widget. If you have such nodes, you can just hook those nodes into the Flutter's widget tree. So if this state node generate a widget, let's try to ask Flutter to rebuild its widget. So this is basically how those libraries works. If you they basically the logic is similar, but they have a little bit different syntax. They expose some different features. We are not going to talk about those things in this talk. But what I want to say is creator is basically the same idea. So what I'm trying to do is building this graph. The difference between creator and those libraries is they are managing this graph in an implicit way, meaning each node just have its just know its edges. So the graph is built because all those nodes have edges. Creator is a little bit different because I just manage the node manage the graph explicitly. So if you want to build a creator library, what it should do? Basically, you should have a class which represents the map, and then you should have a class which represents the node. So the map class basically manage all the nodes and all their edges. So eventually, I have a graph explicitly somewhere. So it's basically a JSON list, if you know graph theory. And if you have this concept, it should be pretty easy. You have a graph, you have a nodes, you have relationships. When the state changes, you just follow those edges and trying to ask a node to rebuild its state. That's pretty much the hell of idea. I will pause here because I actually have a document here which kind of shows how to build the creator library with 100 lines of code. the idea just follow the idea we said earlier. Define a graph, define the nodes, then define some APIs to the graph. You should probably have the library already. So yeah.
These are published already, right? These posts.
This thought is published, and the other one is still pending edit. I'm going to publish. So yeah.
Yeah, I think these are fantastic articles to help people to understand how state management actually works. Thanks for writing these.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I don't think we should go through this how to build a creator here because that's a bunch of code. But I think the high-level idea is quite simple. Just define a class of graph, class of nodes, and define a graph somehow, and trying to define APIs for read, set, or add edges to those graphs, and then it should be good.
Okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. But I would like to dig more into creator though, because people are going to be listening about the creator. How did you get your inspiration about the way that you think it should work?
Let's translate the question again.
My question is, if you look at the different state management, right, there's a reason that people write them in a specific way. Sometimes, like MobX, obviously comes from MobX. Flutter block, I mean, they have their own ideas. I forgot where it kind of all came from. But like, how did you get the API to work with Creator? Like, how did you get the ideas to work with Creator? Like the way that you want to work with it?
To be honest, it's heavily inspired by Riverpod. So if you look at the API, it's kind of similar to Riverpod. That's where I got the inspiration. So because Riverpod works, I know it's going to work. But on the other hand, I do put some thoughts into its design. So I can talk about those things if you want.
Yeah, please.
Basically, I'm trying to keep things simple. So I try not to introduce new concept to this library. So I'm trying to stay with the concept I already introduced. When there's a graph, there's a node. I try to stay with that. So what does that mean? For example, we can have derived state. So if you are thinking about the node is generating a stream of data, it's naturally you can think that, hey, how about we map those data so we get a new node? So that's basically how the iterator and the stream works, right? You can have an iterator called .map, you get a new iterator. Here we have a node which generates a stream of data. I can call a map function just to get a new node which generates new state with a different thing. Similarly, iterator and stream have the where function. You can do filtering, right? How about let's also add that to creator. So you can have a node. You can do a .where, which basically gives you a new node which has a filtered result of the original node. So in that way, it's nicely you can use those functions very easily, but still the concept is still simple. From my implementation's point of view, those things are all nodes. They just happen to have a relationship. So the mapped node just depend on the original node. Another example of this is when you want to listen to things. If you use Block or maybe Riverpod before, they provide a listen function, which is usually just a void function, which have a parameter of previous state and current state. So you just use those two variables to do things, to have some set effects, right? And the way I think about things, why don't we just define a node which captures this previous state and the current state into its state? So basically, I can call a creator.change, which gives me a new node, new creator. Its state is a change object, which has a previous state and a current state. So if you see that way, it's still a normal node from the library's perspective. It just have more data. You can use this data to do whatever you want. You can do set effects with the previous data on that state, but you can also map those things into some other states. So it's not necessarily just doing set effects, but still you can do more things than that. But it's nicely still a node. It's nothing special, right?
Okay, I see. Yeah.
This is what I mean. Change, right? This is still a pretty normal node, which I can do anything about this change object. Okay, another nice thing about Creator, which I put a lot of thought into, is how to handle asynchronous things better. So basically this emitter class, which is very similar to stream in my mind. If you have a stream, it's basically asynchronously, it's emitting a bunch of data. Emitter is doing the same thing. The nice thing about emitter is you don't need to have an initial state. If you're using Flutter block, everything should have an initial state, which sometimes is not doable, not good to do. So emitter, your initial state is just a loading state. When you emit something, it creates some data. If you think about it, it's basically a stream. It works very similar to stream. You have a loading state and a bunch of data comes. They generate the data and trying to tell their listeners, hey, I have data already. The nice thing about it is it's better than stream is it can combine streams easily. You have emitter 1, you have emitter 2, you can have emitter 3, which basically using the latest data of those first 2 emitters and create a new data. If people is familiar with reactive Dart, it's basically the same idea, implemented in a different way, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely pretty cool stuff. I could definitely see all of the influences of Riverpod. So I think if people have some issues with Riverpod, definitely take a look at Creator. Very similar. Now, have you heard of any other projects that are using Creator now, or no?
Not really. So I think if someone is using Creator, please let me know.
Now, working on Chooly, have you actually had any other libraries that you created because of Chooly?
Not exactly. I think on the trend side, it's not that complex. But it does have a lot of graph related stuff. So I'm using, because it's a finance app, you have to show people their growth trajectory or maybe the category of the things. So there's a lot of graph libraries I built on my own. But that's not really in a shareable state or probably not useful for other people.
Yeah, I know there's quite a few graphing libraries in Flutter, but I don't think I found like one graphing library that really sticks out in comparison to others.
Actually, I think there's the one I used earlier. I forgot the name. Let me search. Oh, this one, flchart is the one I used before. I think it's pretty nice. It's decent. Has a lot of functionalities. Have you heard this?
No, I don't think I've seen this one before. This is pretty cool. FL chart.
Yeah, flchart is pretty cool. I think it's very useful. I use it for some cases, but for other cases, because I need a bunch of customized animation, so I'm basically doing the painting myself. But I also check the source code of this library and get a lot of inspirations.
Okay. Is there any other libraries that you think are really good that people should take a look at?
Not right now. I can't think of any other libraries. Let me see. So if you're using Firebase, you're probably already using Flutter, right?
Yeah, Flutterfire. I think that's the only one right now.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried to export?
Oh, this one is nice. Flutter native splash.
I don't think I've seen that one before.
It's basically trying to build the splash screen in a little bit more native way, so your app appears a little bit faster.
Was there a difference? I didn't see a difference between the two.
Slightly different.
Oh, the one on the left, I think, right?
Yeah. I think this one is also true. Another is the launch icon. I like it. Flutter launch icon, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, that's the one to make your icon for your home screen, right?
Yeah. Mm. Oh, it's already in Flutter community. Okay, I think this one. Yeah, personally, I don't use a lot of UI libraries. Most libraries, if the things on the UI side, I tend to build it on myself. And these libraries are good.
Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, with that, I mean, I think your library is pretty cool. Like, I can see there's some pretty cool stuff about it. Have you shown it to Remy to see what he feels like? See if he likes it?
Yeah, I talked to Remy. I think he likes the idea of using emitter, especially the part I'm using future.value, which can, because future.value can be resolved immediately. That's a very nice thing, so you don't need to have those loading state. So I'm not sure if he wants to adopt a similar idea or not, but I think he likes it. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, Remy really is quite good at his work. So happy that we have him in the community. Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we sign off? Because I think we're approaching the end of our time already.
Not really. I think if people want to learn about Creator, I think just come here to read this article, which is how to build creators that library yourself. There is no magic. Everything is very simple. And then start reading the source code. I think the source code is the best thing to learn about library. You will understand how people do things, understand how is the quality of a library, and also have more confidence about libraries compatibility. So yeah, just come to this part. I think this is definitely a very important part in this README. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Terry, for coming on and showing us Creator. And I'm happy that you are taking the time to kind of break down how state management kind of works and how these libraries kind of work. And it could help people to maybe write their own or even contribute to existing ones. So that's fantastic.
Thank you, Alan, for inviting me. It's nice to be here.
Great to have you here.
Ooh.
Thanks.